All right. Well, clearly this gentleman needs no introduction at this point. I just want to quickly introduce. No, I'll give him some introduction. Dr. Richard Salsman, Atlas Society Senior Scholar for Capitalism Under Siege, Top 5 Assaults, and How to Smash Them. Before I hand it off to Richard, I just want to encourage students again, think of your questions and be bold and brave when Q&A starts and raise your hands and we'll get you the mic. Off to you, Richard.
Thank you, Abby. If you have a pencil and paper, before I go through my list, write down your own list. What do you think of the top 5 arguments against capitalism, whether you think they're valid or not, whether they may be popular, influential, maybe devastating. And then you can compare to what I give you. So that's not a exercise. I won't grade the papers, but it might be fun to see whether we agree. And you might convince me to change my structure. So I'm going to give what I think are the top 5 assaults on capitalism, how to smash them. Then I'm going to try to end on time here, giving you 15 or more minutes to throw some at me yourself, or throw some at me you've heard before and haven't been able to refute. By the way, instead of being like totally negative about this, I did promise in the description in the course to say what the hell the system is. So that alone is under dispute. I don't know if you know that, how it's defined, what it means, and that'll be part of the myths that I'll go through. So I thought I would just, this is from what I wrote, the pocketbook of capitalism for the Atlas Society. Here's the very opening summary. So this is just a positive statement, and then we'll go to the negatives. Capitalism is a multifaceted social system that enables and encourages humans to survive and thrive, to live well, long, and happily. In every major dimension, whether morals, politics, economics, or psychology, capitalism is the only proper habitat for humanity. We all know that a fish out of water cannot survive, but a proper habitat is no less necessary for humans. As a pro-human habitat, capitalism is unrivaled, yet for decades it has faced innumerable foes. The main source of disdain for capitalism is a deep distrust of its unique ethic of rational egoism. Okay, just a little bit more. Capitalism, this is a myth, that it's just about economics. Capitalism is far more than an efficient economic system. It's acknowledged by friends and foe alike as the most productive life-enhancing system ever known. But capitalism is prosperous precisely because it's the only social system that counts on a distinctive morality, rational egoism, a specific ideology, individualism, and a unique politics, a rights-respecting constitutionalism. Under liberty and equal rights, disparate talents and ambitions necessarily yield different results. That's the inequality issue. Without any inherent exploitation or injustice. Disputation surrounding capitalism arises less from economics than from ethical issues and from the fact that a proper ethics is secular. Okay, and then lastly, after defining the essence of a social system, in other words, what it is, we must then answer 3 questions. And I do this in my seminar at Duke, the Capitalism For and Against seminar for freshmen. Is it moral? Is it practical? And is it sustainable on any social system? They ask the answer to those 3 questions. Then they're, by the way, very closely related. Unless we can answer yes to all 3, which so far as I know, only Ayn Rand has done on capitalism, answer yes, 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 then it'll be useless, even harmful to human well-being to have other systems. Capitalism is the only social system that aces the test. It's sustainable because it's practical. It's practical because it's moral. It's moral because it's egoistic. It's egoistic because it's rational. See where I'm going with this? And it's rational because it's natural. No case for capitalism lacking these elements or denying their logical dependency can hope to succeed, convince minds, or win the day. All right, that's the positive case for capitalism. That took me 3 minutes. Sorry, it took so long. No, number 1. Did you get this one? Capitalism is unjust because it breeds inequality. This came up in the prior session. All right, who got that one? Not that many. Oh, okay. Now the first thing, how do you answer this? I apparently have 6 minutes for each of these, and then I'll stop. This will have to be quick. So this is not a full answer. This is just the beginnings of a suggestion how to go about this. The first thing to do is define equality and say, you know what? People are not metaphysically equal, are they? Jefferson, all people are created equal. Well, he didn't mean metaphysically. He didn't mean we're all the same height and weight, aptitude. All right, what's the next level? Equality before the law. Treat everyone the same before the law, politically, legally. That is really what they were arguing for. Okay, what's the next equality we hear about? Equality of opportunity. Or the other one, equality of result, or equality of outcomes. You've heard that, right? So there are all these equalities. And you have to get a sense of this, because if capitalism is wrong because of inequality, of what type? What are you talking about? Because if you said, well, because people aren't metaphysically clones of each other, it's a ridiculous critique, right? That's not really what they mean. They do mean that it has unequal results. But the argument you have to give is, of course it does, because people are unequal in their metaphysical makeup, but also in their aptitude, in their race, in their career choice, in their work ethic, in their moral code. Yes, maybe in their family background. So some of these things are, not your choice, your birth status, but many, many things are up to your choice. And the point is, in a free society where people are treated equally before the law, the results will naturally be unequal. And if they're radically unequal, it's because people are, well, there are some atlases out there, right? There are elites who are actually producing things, and then there's commoners. There's ordinary people, many of them, and there's extraordinary people. And the extraordinary people hold up the world. So those kind of arguments, first of all, define equality. Next, talk about the kind of equality that capitalism does rest on. And now last polemical point, because I need to move on. There's an interesting, very interesting paradox that will lead to our next fallacy, which is, if you as an egalitarian demand unequal results, what do you have to do politically? Anyone? What would you have to do to get that result, since it's not natural? Yes, you'd have to treat people unequally before the law. Oh, really? So now we talk about arbitrary government. We talk about literally, in other words, there's a clash here. You can't have both. If you're going to have equality of result, which is unnatural, you are going to have to discriminate, and discriminate badly against the best and the brightest for the benefit of the worst and the dumbest. You see the idea? And so the idea of favoritism or disfavoritism, we're going to have redistribution. This one pays an 80% tax rate, that one pays none. That's unequal treatment, and it's unjust. So quite against the argument, capitalism is unjust because it leads to inequality. No, this critique and the demand of equal results is itself radically unjust because it goes against human nature. All right. Want another one? Crony capitalism. Capitalism leads to cronyism. What is crony? Cronies are just your buddies, your favorite groups. So we hear this phrase, crony capitalism, which is a contradiction in terms as far as I'm concerned. Because as I just said, capitalism is a system of treating people the same before the law, not treating cronies with favors and your enemies with disfavors, and you trust bust the ones you don't like, and you bail out the Wall Street guys you do like. That is all unequal treatment, right? But that is cronyism. And the reason I put this second is so you'd understand it better, having heard the first answer. You're going to invite cronyism when there's unequal treatment. So people look out at the law and they say, oh, there's unequal treatment. If there was equal treatment, they wouldn't bother coming to this city. Why would they? They wouldn't come here because everyone's treated the same. They come here because they know there's differentials. And these politicians purposely put in differentials. Please pay me and I'll change the tax rate. Please pay me and maybe we won't trust bust you. Please contribute to my campaign and I might bail you out in the next crisis. You see how this works? So this is a result of a hybrid system. Cronyism does exist. Favoritism does exist. K Street, if you know, does exist with all the lobbying firms out there. But unless you have influence, there's not going to be any influence peddling. That's where the influence peddling comes from, because the government influence is so great and so disparate and so arbitrary. Sometimes they'll say there's too much money in politics. To get money out of politics, you have to get politics out of money making. See the principle? If you get politics out of money making, nobody will spend a dime on these entities that work here. So that's not capitalism, that's a hybrid system that's going to invite favoritism. Did anyone get that one? Crony capitalism? Some of you? Here's another one. Capitalism is prone to crises, boom and bust cycles, Great Depressions, Great Recessions. It periodically crashes and burns of its own accord. This somewhat comes from Marx, but also comes from Keynes to anti-capitalists. Booms and busts, speculative, crazy, wild gyrations that disrupts people's lives, sometimes ruins business, ruins people's lives, And if only we had a more stable, unchanging, static, stagnant, I'm talking like Biden now, stagnant. Wow, what does that sound like? It sounds like a pre-capitalist era where you see the lines that Professor Hicks have shown, nothing happens for centuries on end. You see no business cycle in there. You see no ups and downs for anything. If that's their ideal, that's pre-modern. That's their ideal. No change, no dynamism. So the argument here you have to make is, what are you looking for? Stagnation? Static existence? Everything is predictable. You never have to look for a new job. You never have to readjust your portfolio. Capitalism is a dynamic, growing, living, breathing, wonderful system. Now, does that mean it's this crazy crash and burn system? No. The Great Depression, hyperinflations, stock market crashes, widespread bank failure are due to government intervention in the economy. Now we can go chapter and verse on this. Mises and Hayek, go read Mises, Hayek, and Ein and others. Mostly central banking, the manipulation of money and credit, that's all important because money touches everything, right? So if you wreck the money, if you debase the money, if you take it off the gold standard, as populists wanted, by the way, populists were against the gold standard, you create gyrations and artificial ones that disrupt business planning and disrupt a whole bunch of things, including the financial markets. But taxes also do it. Hoover raised taxes from, 25% to 65% in 2 years and caused the Great Depression. So did the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. Those are taxes. That's not capitalism. Or even the 2008 crisis. What the 2008 crisis? The government took on a national policy of everyone should own a home. That was Bush. Everyone should own a home. There's a home ownership gap. And so we're going to promote through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, these fraudulent agencies. We're going to make it possible for everybody to own homes, even though they can't afford it. And surprise, 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 2 years later, there are massive defaults and the banks go down and blah, blah, blah. And it's blamed on what? Wall Street greed and predatory lending. Not predatory borrowing by these freeloaders. All right, well, that one is an older one, but it showed up again in 2008 and 2009, so it got back on the radar again. To this day, if you ask economists, what the hell happened in 2008? That's a capitalist excess. They didn't take any, did they get rid of Fannie and Freddie Mac? No. Did they get rid of the FDIC, which subsidizes reckless lending? No. Did they get rid of the Federal Reserve too big to fail doctrine? No. None of the government interventions that caused that were repealed, which gives you a sense of, what they know what they're doing. And they lie about it anyway. Anyway, are there business cycles under capitalism? Yes, there are business cycles. Because there's long-range planning and there's complexity. And yes, of course, some products and companies and industries will be rising. Incandescent bulbs and cars and then candles go down. So capitalism is always reintroducing new products, new services. It's the Schumpeter dynamic process. And people who can't stand dynamism and can't stand change will hate the system and yearn for stagnation. All right, I'm watching the clock here. Anyone have that one? Crises, boom, bust, for lack of a better, no one. Oh, you did, It's kind of an old one from way back. It came out of there were crises in the 1880s and 90s they blamed on capitalism, but then the Great Depression was an obvious one, right? I remember though, even in the high inflation of the 70s, it was blamed on greedy corporations. Biden blamed the recent inflation, he called it greedflation. So their theory of inflation was Greed did it. So apparently when inflation was low, all the businesses were altruists. Then they became greedy and then prices went up. Now prices are coming down because they're less greedy. That's their ignoramus theory of inflation. By the way, we had inflation in the 70s, it went off the gold standard. That's not a capitalist move. All right, what number am I on? Here's a third. Fourth? Oh, fourth. This is going to be easier than I thought, faster than I thought. Capitalism is bad for the environment. Anyone have that one? Oh, that got more than, maybe that should have been first. Oh, what's the argument? By the way, what's the argument? I should have said up front, whenever you think of these, whenever you hear these, make sure you don't come up with straw man arguments. Meaning, or what we say, give it a steel man argument. Give the best argument in your own mind, give the best argument you can, pretending, you're some crazy person for a moment, Marxist, Keynesian, feminist, environmentalist, and give the best argument you can, the best you've heard, and then address it, because it's very easy to just say, oh, that's a blow, and then eliminate it. That's too easy. So here's my best take on this. It's bad for the environment. It uses up resources. I mean, that woman we faded the other night, she digs up stuff out of the ground. There are companies that they mine things, and these are depletable resources. They're not renewable. We'll never see these resources again. Capitalism is this consumption monster, defiling the planet, using up resources, never to be seen again resources. By the way, the first oil rig in America was at Titusville, Pennsylvania. Anyone from that? 1859? Nobody knew about oil under the ground until 1859. Does that mean we had an oil shortage before 1859? There's tons of oil that was under the ground in the Middle East. Nobody knew about it. Capitalism creates resources. Oh, I'm moving into the refutation too soon. No, it uses up resources according to, it pollutes, it poisons the rivers, the streams, the air, right? There's a negative externalities, economists call it. Capitalism spewing its costs off onto the public and not incorporating it into its own P&Ls. So it's not only the profit seeking also makes them want to foist their costs and pollution off onto others. Industry is causing greenhouse gases. Unfortunately here the story shifts a little bit. In the 70s it was global cooling. It was going to be a problem. And then in the 80s the temperature went up a little bit, so they said, no, it's a global warming. Sorry. But it's still capitalism's fault. And then they didn't know what happened with the temperature, so they said the problem is climate change. Reminds me of those forecasters on Wall Street. The market's going to go up, wrong. It's going to go down, wrong. And then they'll just say, it's going to change. You'll always be right. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant move. Of course it'll change. Anyway, I'm hitting them before I'm giving them. But that's it, right? And the idea also is there's this natural environment that's intrinsically valuable apart from human beings. And humans aren't natural, so they're not part of this intrinsic value. So see that there's a clash. It's not capital versus labor anymore. It's humans versus the earth. And the humans are the capitalists, talking like Biden again. The capitalists are like capitalism now ruining the entire planet. See the move? Another way of looking at it would be it's short-termist. You're not thinking long range. You're not thinking intergenerationally like we are. We're actually really caring about the planet. You aren't. You're caring about, quarterly profits is the dastardly goal. All right, so we can add other things, but it would take too long. That's the essence of it. Now, here's the first thing to remember. Anytime you hear the phrase, the environment, what's the key word? It's not the long one, it's the short one. The. What? What's the environment? All right, what if I said to you, we're in an environment. Right here, right now. We're in a room. There's seating, there's clothing, most of you are dressed. There's something called room temperature. No climate change. There's no climate change in this room. So humans have created an environment propitious to our comfort, I hope. It's a little hot for me. But see what I mean? Now, that's an environment. If that's true, capitalism is great for the environment. It builds these great cities. It gives us comfort. It gives us longer lives, healthier lives, happier lives. If that's the environment, but why isn't that the environment? Why aren't we we have human nature. Why aren't we natural? Why aren't we a natural part of this thing? Unlike animals, we're not sedentary or passive in our environment. We're shaping our environment. We have to shape our environment. It just didn't come this way automatically. That's what they hate. So when they mean the environment, if you get down to it, they really mean the earth X us. They have documentaries actually called, What Would the Earth Look Like? X us, without us. Look it up, there's documentaries about that, where they're like gleeful about imagining everything would go away, everything would erode, the cities would crumble. They do documentaries about this. That's their dream, to have industrialization go away. That's, by the way, why they're anti-population. They're not anti-population because they think the population will eat up the resources, because they assume everyone is a consumer. They don't produce anything. What about the population of people? Most of us, right, produce things. So that's not going to wreck our standard of living. They literally want to depopulate the planet because they're kind of they're misanthropes. They don't like people. And since capitalism is very favorable to people, they're not going to be favorable to capitalism. Oh, last thing about capitalism, this is more of a, and the environment. This is more of an economic argument. For the you economists out there, I call it the 3 Ps. Prices, well, the first one is property. Property, prices, profits. If you say those 3 words to an environmentalist, they'll go like this, they'll try to exercise you. Evil, scary words, evil words. The price system motivates producers to produce just the right amount, and not more than they have to, right? And at a profit. I mentioned profit as part of it. In other words, they're not doing this to have a net destruction of wealth, but a net production of wealth. Most crucially important, property. If everything is privately owned, not only are people motivated to treat the resources, whatever they are, well, to cultivate them, to harvest them at just the right time, you know, whether this is oil mining or whether this is forestry or whether this is farming, you know the point. You're motivated. You treat your own car better than a rental car, you know, usually. You get the idea. Or a rental house or apartment versus your house, you know, so that part of it. So, but it's not just the motivational aspect of it. It's also the aspect of it that capitalism is not anarchism. It does have government, right? And one of its main functions is the judiciary. And what does the judiciary do? It not only does criminal law, it does civil law. So any lawyers in the room? You know, torts. So a tort is a wrong. You polluted on my property. You damaged my property. So capitalism does have a system of handling these, what we call externalities, which should be internalized. And then most of the problems you find associated with pollution and other things are on public property. In the literature, it's called The Tragedy of the Commons. That's a very popular article from the 60s, I think, in academia. What's the tragedy? Commonly owned things. The tragedy is you dissipate the wealth, you don't cultivate it, you don't have a long-range attitude toward the... So it's capitalism and private property and the profit motive that gives you the longer-range view. I mean, think of someone like Weyerhaeuser, the forest product, do they still exist, the forest products company? They own timber. They own vast acres of timber, right? Why? To sell it. Lumber and paper product and other things, right? Why don't they cut down all the trees next week? These short-termist, profit, greedy. Weyerhaeuser would say, oh, we'd be out of business in a minute. First of all, the price would plummet, right? We're dumping all this wood onto the, we wouldn't make any money. It's just ridiculous. So there's an optimal rate of harvesting. They're motivated to grow more trees, right? They're not just taking the trees and getting rid of them. It's ridiculous, but that's the image. No, they're cultivating as a farmer would, growing every year. But this happens in all the industries and fields. Let me see if I want to say more about, anyway, so the prices, property prices and profit argument actually is an argument for the proper maintenance of the environment qua man, the man's environment, his use of resources. By the way, here's another angle on profits, which is kind of funny. Imagine, I don't know, imagine a car company trying to make a profit. The ultimate thing they're selling is the car. What's the costs? What kind of costs go into making the car? Other than labor, they're gonna have to pay laborers, right? But other things like the materials, metal, glass, upholstery, rubber, right? You know, all those things, right? So if they're really greedy, profit-oriented, profit-maximizing businesses, they would want the lowest cost possible. They would want to use the fewest materials possible. I mean, a green might be thinking, oh, they're conserving resources. But of course, that's not their motive. They're trying to make as much money as possible. But the profit motive includes minimizing your costs, being as most efficient as possible with the resources, right? And if these people who are worried about running out of resources, that alone is an argument against their argument. I remember being in a bank many years ago, and they used to keep track of how many paper clips we used when we still used paper clips. But I remember thinking, that is a very good profit-seeking. If they're worried about the paper clips, they must be worried about the loan quality. I think I have 4 minutes more, and I don't know whether to go to questions. Do I have?
There's
Is
gonna
that 4 minutes for me? Or
That's 4 minutes for you, so
For me.
there'll be 15 more minutes of questions after the 4 minutes.
Okay, let me do 2 more. Okay, I'll do 2 more quickly in 4 minutes, if that's possible. Capitalism is imperialistic. It's warmongering. It's colonialist. What do you think of that one? That one actually comes from Lenin. Marx didn't have that so much, but Lenin, when Lenin came along, greedy capitalists are prone to marching all over the world and pushing their system onto everybody else. And one of the arguments is kind of a Keynesian argument. Capitalism is so productive. That contradicts their other critiques, but capitalism is so productive. It has a surplus of goods, and it doesn't have enough people to sell them to, so it pushes into Africa and Asia and is selling their stuff. And so it's breaking out into markets abroad, and sometimes you'll meet resistance from countries saying you're going to have a military helping you get in there. You've heard that argument before? Or here's another one based on environmentalism. Since it's eating up the resources domestically, we've got to go get them elsewhere. So the multinationals are like digging up Africa and they're digging up Asia because they've already dug up Denver. You see the idea, though, that, and therefore they're going to fund the Pentagon to be in every country. Now, when you look out at the world, actually, this seems true, because the U.S. has, 800 bases all over the world, and it's in NATO, and it's providing national defense for 30 other countries. Why is that? That does sound colonialist. That does sound imperialist. I'll just put it this way. Imperialism, which is a thing, it definitely is a thing. Countries, invading each other and conquering each other instead of trading with each other is a thing. It's a totally pre-capitalist thing. I mean, it had vestiges after 1700s, but mercantilism, which is protectionism, imperialism, and closely associated colonialism, those are the vassal states you have under you, they're all phenomenon of the pre-capitalist era. When capitalism came in the 1700s, 1800s, as with slavery, Professor Hicks showed the other day, these vile institutions faded away. Not overnight, but they're not part of the capitalist system. To this day, these people are saying capitalism is inherently racist. Capitalism is inherently imperialistic. Capitalism is inherently colonial. What's amazing, with no one knowing the history, they don't know that all those things dominated pre-capitalism. And by the way, if they're coming back at all, as they are sometimes, slavery in Africa still, it's because we're moving away from capitalism. So the U.S. government foreign policy today doesn't reflect capitalism, doesn't reflect, Raytheon's profit motive. There is a military-industrial complex going on, but if you look at Ayn Rand's essay, The Roots of War are statism. That's what makes countries warring. That's what makes them want to attack others. That's what makes them have a Pentagon, which is marching all over the place and losing wars, even to people who live in caves. 1 minute more. This one I'll bring up because it's in Ayn's book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. What did she mean by ideal? Anyone? North Star? Like a perfection standard. Anyone else? Moral ideal? Something we don't have, it could be achieved, yeah. Or moral ideal, because that's all through the book, right? It's ideal. In philosophy and epistemology, if you say ideal, it means unreal. If you say ideal morally, you're saying it's, morally superior. So what's interesting is sometimes you'll get this argument as a critique. Capitalism is imaginary. It's not, doesn't exist. It's never existed. It's never existed, therefore it never will exist. This is a platonic dream you have. Sometimes they'll say you have faith in capitalism, that are invoking the same thing. It's not real. Now, how do you answer that one? I think part of it is make sure your definition is realistic. We're not saying, hey, here's my definition of capitalism. Lemonade in the oceans and unicorns and you never have to sleep. I mean, it would be dismissed immediately as unreal, right? But if you just say capitalism is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, I'm quoting Ayn Rand here, including property rights, I mean, we're not talking about La La Land here. We're not talking about a heaven we can't describe. It's a real thing. Now then, but you do have to go to historical examples. My favorite is, they'll say, give me the closest approximation to capitalism. 1865 to 1915 is a good one. Like, in other words, between the US Civil War and World War I, very free. I picked that, by the way, because now you have slavery is gone. You have a free labor market, so it's harder to pick the period prior to that. No central bank, no income tax, no real serious tariffs, no regulatory state, alphabet rate, no New Deal, no Great Society, no Obamacare. A fairly free country. Government spending was like 2% of GDP. It's 50% now. So, and that was the greatest movement of improvement in standard of living, inventions, Thomas Edison, Carnegie, Ford, Mellon, amazing period. Now Britain has long histories of, and you can to this day, Hong Kong, or to this day they measure the state of economic freedom in the world, and then you can see how people do. So these things are measurable. It's not imaginary. It's not some platonic vision of things. So don't get caught in the idea that you're, defending something we all hate, which would be making up stuff and mystical approaches. Okay, I'll stop there. How much time we got?
All right, we got about 13, 14 minutes for Q&A. So I think I see someone right
Q&A
here.
or any other challenges, yeah.
Or any other, present another challenge as well.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Go ahead. I would say you don't see it too much in America, but certainly earlier on, at the dawn of capitalism, the big moral defense against it would be from the religious view, that it's against God and his canon.
Yes.
How do you productively debate with someone who is making that moral arguments against it from their religious view?
Yeah, one interesting starting point, which might startle them a little bit, is to agree with them.
Yeah.
And just say, you're right, it's very insightful. Yes, the more religious view of this earth is not important, but the second life, well, whatever we get, is. And selfless sacrifice to others, renunciation rather than gain is moral. Yes, capitalism goes with none of that. It's actually anti-capitalism. And it ruled the medieval period and the Dark Ages and 1,000 years of stagnation. And then on the positive side, you say, the alternative to that is reason, not faith and mysticism, egoism, not altruism, and individualism, not this kind of mini collectivism that the religionists advocate, the family or the mini collectives above everything. Yeah, so first of all, say on your ethic, on your morality, which is it is an ethic, we'll grant that, it's totally anti-capitalist, and they would probably agree. And they might be forced to say, yeah, I think in the end I'd rather keep my ethic and have the stagnation, knowing that they go together. If they say, no, I want my religious ethic and prosperity, you start talking about contradictions, not possible, you're in fantasy land, you're the one making it up now. I don't know if that helps, that's off the cuff. Yeah.
My question is, I guess, is the environmentalism argument sort of even a straw man to the question, like, how is benevolence intrinsic to self-interest and free markets. I think that's where like the root of it is. And then the environmentalism, the like mercury in the ocean, the nutraceuticals in the food supply, all that sort of follows.
On this one, I didn't have time to do this, but this is worth distinguishing. It's kind of subtle. Those of you who are old enough to remember the ecology movement. It wasn't called environmental, it was called ecology in the 70s, 60s and 70s or so. On the surface, it was for clean air and clean water, because there were pollution and there was smog in California and stuff like that, right? So real concerns. Except the answer was more capitalism. You know, not only technology, scrubbers and catalytic converters and things like that, water treatment plants, right? That's technology. That's not something communism or socialism would give you. So the difference here, though, is that's a humanistic standard. Notice their standard was, this pollution is bad for humans. A capitalist should welcome that kind of critique, because we're the humanistic philosophy. We're the one that gives you a habitat for humanity. And it's environmentalism that shifted mostly like in the 80s or maybe after the 70s. At some point there was a shift to, now it's environmentalism, not ecology. And whenever you get an ism, you know it's probably an ideological crusade of some kind, for good or ill. And this is where they brought in the idea that the environment apart from us has intrinsic value and should not be touched, because you'll spoil it. It has value. You understand what they mean by that. In and of itself, apart from any valuer. That alone is a contradiction in terms. But you can see why, if you have that premise plus, and humans aren't natural. So they're not part of this intrinsic value we're going to preserve, so they become anti-human. They become anti-humanist. So that's one way to do it, to distinguish those two, because the second one is virulently anti-capitalism. The first one, ecology, is probably just misguided, because they're not quite sure how capitalism handles pollution and other things.
Yes. There's a sort of series of research papers that have been published by Open Research, which is a group backed by Sam Altman of OpenAI. And this is a series of research into universal basic income. And it seems like the tech world is quite obsessed with universal basic income.
Yes, they are.
Starting with like Andrew Yang and now Sam Altman. And so this research purportedly shows that a series of $1,000 payments to low-income individuals for 3 years netted sort of outcomes of people spending to meet their basic needs, people decided to work slightly lower hours but not dropping out of the workforce, and people became more future-oriented, so they established a budget, they saved more, they put more focus into higher education and possibly starting a business. So this paper's, again, I haven't looked deeply into it, but what is being reported is that it shows a victory of some sort for universal basic income. How would capitalists or people who are capitalist-minded sort of respond to such claims?
The response to universal basic income is a big thing. They're trying to guarantee income for people whether they go to work or not. So on those grounds alone, the capitalist view would be that's massively unjust. It's unjust for people to get the unearned. It's unjust for people to be freeloaders. It's unjust for them to be parasites on producers. Okay, almost nobody puts it that way because it sounds so harsh. It sounds very harsh, right? And you sound inhumane if you don't give this basic income to people, but what do you mean give to? Taken from whom? So our focus would be on the individual rights of the payers, and that should not be violated. But you bring up an interesting point because it's a secondary critique of capitalism. You know what it is? Automation, machines. Robots are taking our jobs. AI will take our jobs. The reason UBI is being pushed by techies, not all of you, not all the techies, is they accept this Marxist, it was Ricardo, it's Marx, a whole bunch of old economists who thought that this is weird now, that capitalism's creation of capital is bad. Well, it's funny because when they work the worker, it's like, you're exploiting the worker. And they're like, how about we replace you with a kiosk at McDonald's? So we're not exploiting you anymore, we'll just use this capital equipment. And capital equipment is often more efficient and it's actually displacing labor, right? Now labor has to become skilled. not just physical and manual. It has to become skilled to be able to work the machines, right? So capitalism over time adjusts that way. That's why the work becomes more and more mental and skilled and less physical labor. And the physical laborist types, the farmers say, or the agrarians, or the Marxists, hate the system that is moving away from them. But it's moving away in a way that we would say, I would say is evolved, it's futuristic. So there's always been a widespread myth that the introduction of machines not only dehumanizes us, but takes our jobs, and therefore there will be mass unemployment. Now, on some level, you might say, well, that's a humanistic approach. We care about mass unemployment or mass immiseration. But there isn't widespread unemployment due to machines. We have way more machines and automation now than we did 200 years ago, but it's not like there's 50% unemployment, with all the farmers out on the streets, because they used to be half the labor force in 1800, which is true. They were half the labor force in 1800. Now they're 3%. How did that happen? They produce way more food, only 3% of them, versus 50%. So that's an interesting one, because one, it has the welfare state mistake of redistribution of wealth is moral. It isn't. But it's wedded to this other mistake that machines that capitalism does introduce are bad for humans. So it's like a double myth in the same place.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one thing for Sonia, because there was another study that was just released by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which examined the impact of government giving low-income individuals $1,000 per month in non-work-related payments for 3 years, and the findings actually were quite negative. The study found that the total amount of work withdrawn from the market is fairly substantial after the free money arrives. They also found that, quote, job quality or human capital improvements that advocates had hoped for might accompany the cash benefits. No evidence of that. So I would just recommend the Committee to Unleash Prosperity has reported on this, and it's a very important study that just came out.
Yeah, and another approach to this would be, notice the emphasis is always on the recipients of the income. So to hell with the rights of those paying, those are just dismissed. And even when they say, well, the recipient's incentive might be bad. They're sitting on the couch, unwilling to go to work, right? Guess how to counter that. If you're an anti-capitalist, how do you counter that? Incentives? What do you mean they're not self-interested? We don't want them to be self-interested. Self-interest is a vice. So any incentive economics argument you hear, which though true, you see my point? There is a motive to work if you're going to be paid for it. But the idea that that should be a criteria is itself rejected by altruists, because they hate self-interest. So incentive is just a stand-in for self-interest. They're not going to be self-interested in going to work. And the answer will be, good. Then they're truly moral. They're not working and they're altruists.
In the back here.
Thank you so much for shedding light on this subject.
You're welcome.
You spoke about equality of outcomes and passing also externalities. My question is this. Most economists want to predict the future, and of course, because of so many externalities, might not be possible. How do we, as liberals or people advocating for capitalism and objectivism, balance proactively looking to ensure that we are not living 1 year at a time or one step at a time, and also trying to curb the aspect of people trying to predict everything that will happen and come into our way? Thank you.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Okay.
Something about the future and liberalism and productivity?
Yes. The question is, how do we ensure that we are not living one step at a time, and also ensure that people are not trying to, with their predictions, come into our way? That's my question.
I don't understand it.
How do we make sure we're going one step at a time and not trying to look too far to the future and let people's forward predictions kind of ruin, untrue predictions ruin the potential?
All right, I'll try to go with this. This happens with climatologists as well as, technology futurists. If you're saying, should we take with a grain of salt futuristic predictions like, the climate's going to do this, therefore the planet will do this, therefore we have to get rid of capitalism, in 30 years, by 2030. You should also always be suspicious of that. But not from the standpoint of humans can't know anything. We're idiots. We can't project the future. There has to be rational forecasting. I believe actually in forecasting, in economic forecasting. But it doesn't mean you're omniscient, doesn't mean you'll be perfect, but you do have to have rational calculations of what's likely to happen on a whole bunch of things. And I actually think public policy, I'm not an anarchist, there has to be public policy, right? That is something that has to be taken into consideration if the policy is going to be rational. But by the way, I cannot resist if I have 30 seconds, because I left it out, but you'll enjoy this. The one about capitalism being imaginary, remember the answer I gave you? It's never existed or whatever. There actually is on the other side a totally platonic imaginary concept called pure and perfect competition. So if you know in economics, they have this view that the perfect market would be very few minor buyers and sellers. They have no market share. Their products look alike. There's a list of this in economic textbooks. And if the market doesn't meet that criteria, they trust bust them. So if anything, the imaginary attitude toward capitalism is held by, it would have to be, right? Because they set up a straw man, they set up a caricature sort of, and then burn it down, right? So they're the ones actually that invoke the imaginative. But on our side, this might sound controversial to you, I think laissez-faire capitalism is improper. I think the adjective laissez-faire is imaginary, because it means hands off. It means like no touching. I'm very uncomfortable with it, I always have been. I would rather call it, I don't know, constitutional capitalism, if you want to give it a name. But the laissez-faire attitude, and it's actually been put as the separation of the state and economics. It really should say state and the economy. There can be no separation. As long as there's a rule of law, as long as there's some kind of tax system that supports the government we know should exist, they cannot be completely, the Venn diagram is not none-touching. There has to be some overlap, but it has to be what I call proper touching, like not prudish or imprudent touching. But that one we could set for another time. I have a whole lecture on whether we should be using the phrase laissez-faire economics, but only because of this idea that it's somewhat contrived and imaginary, and we don't want our critics mocking us because we're saying things like laissez-faire economics, because it sounds a little too much like anarchy. It sounds a little too much like there is no government anywhere near the economy, if that makes sense. Okay.
Well, and if you guys have further questions for Richard, I just want to remind you there's going to be 2 more opportunities to chat with him today. We have our mentorship roundtables happening right after lunch. He'll be hosting one of those tables back in here. And then we also have our final session of the day is an Ask Me Anything with all of the Atlas Society scholars. So if you have burning questions you didn't get to ask, you can come back here and ask during the Ask Me Anything. On that note, we are going to break for lunch. Be back here at 1:15. Students, I just wanted to explain a little bit more about the mentorship roundtables. We're going to have all of our scholars and then some of our wonderful donors and Board of Trustees members are going to be hosting tables on entrepreneurship, business, capitalism, law, and quite a few more things that are not coming to the top of my head right now. So if you want to chat with these individuals, get some career mentorship, some life mentorship, be back here at 1:15 for that session. And lunch is downstairs in the Potomac Ballroom where it was yesterday, starting right now.
It's all listening and the great
Big round of
questions.
applause
Thank
for
you.
Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. You can stay connected with all of the Atlas Society's content by hitting that subscribe button below.